Hello, listeners, and welcome to a very special episode of Homegrown KC, a podcast dedicated to exploring Kansas City's fascinating history and sharing stories from its rich past. I'm your host, Laura. Joining me today is Andrew Gustafson. I said it right? Okay, good. From the Johnson County Museum. How are you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. So for folks who didn't listen to our last episode together, and y'all need to check that out, give us a quick intro on who you are and what this place is.
Yeah, sure. I'm Andrew Gustafson. I'm the Curator of Interpretation for the Johnson County Museum, and that means I help people access history. I get to do that mainly through researching and writing, fabricating and installing exhibitions, or special exhibits, but I also do things like social media, adult programming, blogs, special tours. And if you don't know where we are, the Johnson County Museum is in Overland Park, Kansas, in the old King Louis West building. That was a bowling alley and an ice skating rink. Museum actually sits down on the floor of the ice skating rink. So pretty cool place. Yeah, come check us out.
Okay. Well, we're meeting today to discuss your newest special exhibit, Redlining. So my first question is, what is this about?
Yeah, sure. So we opened our newest special exhibit, Redlined, Cities, Suburbs, and Segregation, on January 29th, which was Kansas Day. And it occupies our special exhibit gallery, which is about a 1,500 square foot space down in the museum. And we use it to take deeper dives on topics that are in our main exhibits, or bring in traveling exhibits sometimes on things that are relevant to Johnson County's history and American culture. And so redlining, the concept, I think the definition that we've been using is the systematic disinvestment of some neighborhoods and people in favor of others. And that was often done on those decisions were often made on the basis of race or skin color. It was a private practice for a while, and then it became a federal policy for about a 30-year period between the Great Depression and 1968. And it still has legacies that are impacting communities across the nation, including the Kansas City region. Yeah, basic overview. But what is a very complex topic.
Right. And so we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. Why did you want to do this exhibit, and why now?
Yeah, so, the Johnson County Museum has been talking about redlining for a long time. It's been in our exhibits since we were at the old location. We'll be in this building 5 years in June. It's on the walls in our main exhibit now. It's on our tours. We've done field trips for high school students around this topic. We've done blog posts and social media posts around this topic. So it's something we've always been talking about, because the federal policy that was involved in it really helped shape suburban areas like Johnson County. That's such an important part of this county's story. And so we've wanted for a while to take a deeper dive on this. And it seems like a good time now, as people are looking around their communities and thinking, how can we improve where we live? What are some of the reasons our communities look the way they do? It just is a great time to have a fuller understanding of this very complex topic. That for a lot of folks is invisible. It was an invisible system, but for people who were impacted by it, that was never the case. So I'm talking about that a little bit. And I would say, too, in our exhibits, we have 4 big themes in there: land, policies, people, and regionalism. And this really is a topic that
seems to cover all 4.
All of those. And it really is that regional thing.
Yeah.
You can't have Johnson County forms because of things that were happening in, the suburban areas of Johnson County form because of what was happening in Kansas City, and back and forth, right? And It's also this really interesting national narrative that Johnson County individuals are helping to shape, and then that national narrative is in turn shaping Johnson County. So just a lot of really interesting connections and really important history to grapple with, yeah.
And I thought the museum did a really good job of showing both this topic on the national scale and here in our area.
Thanks. Yeah. It is definitely a national story. You could go into this exhibit and think about any major metropolitan area and its suburbs, and it plays out in almost the same ways, And those maps that we talk about as redlining maps, they were residential security maps. They were made by the government agencies Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Administration made maps to rank neighborhoods, basically the risk of investing in a neighborhood. And those maps were made for over 230 cities across the United States. So this really is, in so many ways, this national story that played out at the local level. So.
And you do have a giant map of Kansas City, of one of those maps on the wall. And then you have another, I'm not sure the word I'm looking for here, image, there we go, that has U.S. and then it highlights several different cities besides Kansas City and shows their maps.
Yeah. So the main narrative of this exhibit is around the kind of the outside walls. It follows a linear pattern, and then in the center we have different highlights or blow-ups, right? The giant Kansas City map, I think that's like 9 feet by 8 feet or something like that. It's quite large. And those are opportunities to get out of that narrative and think about how you fit into this story, how your neighborhood fits into this story, how your city or your region fits into it. And then also, think about the modern day. Maybe you're back in the 1930s in the narrative, but you can look at that 1939 map of Kansas City and think about your home today, or a restaurant you like to go to, or a neighborhood you like to go shopping in. What did it look like? What was the rank of it in the 1930s? And then how's that played out in the 60, almost 80 years since then, right?
Right.
Almost 100 years since then. So, yeah, we felt that was important to be able to locate something on that map, in terms of the Kansas City map, to make it more personal to think about, and then also to reflect that back on that national. It's a huge story. This isn't just a Kansas City, Johnson County story for sure. So.
And so this is not a traveling exhibit. Y'all put this together yourselves.
That's right.
How much time and effort went into this?
Yeah, so this was a big one. This is about 1.5 years of research and writing. I was project lead on that. So I read through, more than 100, 120 maybe, books, scholarly articles, dissertations, media coverage. And then I went to physical archives in the area and also did some research online through Library of Congress and National Archives, thousands of pages of primary documents to write this story. And, so we're a history museum where most of the folks and staff here are historians, and so we can never just talk about whatever the topic is. We always have to go back in time and talk about those foundations. So the story is about 175 years of history. It goes way back in time, or over 100 years for sure. And so it was about 1.5 years in the making. And I produced a 85-page footnoted research paper. When we do a deep dive on a topic like this, we generally create a research paper and then work through that as a staff. The curator of collections, education, myself, interpretation, and then our director gather together, read through it, figure out what is a workable narrative, where are there objects or images that can help tell that story that's in that research paper, and then turn it into a smaller script. It's supposed to be a smaller script. So this is a 40-page exhibit script. In fact, if you want a fun fact, there are just 1,200 less words in the Redlined exhibit than there are in the entire Becoming Johnson County permanent main exhibit.
Wow.
So there's a lot of story there. And we debated that because as a public history institution, telling a story in a simple, clean, minimal way is really the best way. And yet this story is so complex and so little understood, even with our own staff. We found out so much as we researched this that we felt it was important to have as much of the story as possible on the walls, and making the decisions of what to cut out didn't feel appropriate, So big process, big exhibit, but sorry.
It's okay. No, actually, that was going to be my next question. So that was one of the first things I noticed, was that it's really text heavy.
Yeah,
and this was a deliberate decision.
It was. It was because, there's so much primary source material in there. So quotes pulled out of documents, the original documents on the walls or in the display cases. we felt it was really important to have that evidence in the exhibit and to be able to go back and see those primary sources, those policies, those legal documents, quotes from individuals, quotes from organizations, so that you could put that in context and really think about these things that were happening. And so there are, when we started this exhibit, we were like, well, are there any pictures? Is there going to be a single artifact, besides a deed abstract? That's not very exciting, this legal document. And, we do have 10 display cases in there. We have a Monopoly board, which is intriguing.
That was a little bit surprising. I saw that and I was like, oh, please don't tell me that it's a bad thing.
Yeah. And, and over 140 or 150 images, including, a lot of those are graphics of like newspapers and things, being able to go back and read those accounts from different time periods. So yeah, it was a decision. And also with that, our exhibit runs are usually like 3 to 6 months, 8 months on the long end of an exhibit. This is up for a full year. Yeah. And 2022 is the museum's 55th anniversary year.
Yay.
It's also this building, the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center, where the Johnson County Museum lives. It's the 5th anniversary of this building. And so leaving it up for that full year sort of makes a statement how important we think this history is, and then also provides a lot of opportunities to come back and engage in that. We have quarterly free days. The next one is March 17th. There's one on June 11th. So folks can come back and engage in that exhibit more than once, in addition to all the programming that's happening around this exhibit. So.
We'll give it to the programming.
Yeah.
I got a couple other questions about this exhibit. So what do you do with your research paper that you create? It just goes into your personal archives? Do you publish it anywhere?
Yeah, so the research paper is really for staff to be able to hone in on topics and how we're going to work that narrative. As another example of that research paper, in 2018, we put together an exhibit called The Turbulent 20s, all about the 1920s. And we knew we wanted to focus on that decade. We didn't know what we wanted to focus on about that decade. So that was about almost 120 page research paper.
Wow, okay.
Sort of on everything from the 1920s in terms of culture and politics and, events and things. And so that really helped us narrow in on specific things that we were going to put in the exhibit. This is a little more precise, even though redlining is such a big topic. It's pretty narrow, and so while we had this giant research paper on all the things, it helped us narrow in on that key narrative that we could tell. So yeah, that goes into the museum's archives for exhibits that we do. And then the script that's on the wall down there, we're hoping to transition into something published that would be available to purchase here in the museum store.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah.
We do have a bibliography that's publicly available, all the sources that we looked through and worked with in order to write that research paper and the exhibit, of course. So,
and I'm assuming that's on your website.
It's not, but I'm happy to send it out to anybody who contacts.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it will be on the website eventually, the bibliography. So,
and I noticed that you have a lot of stuff highlighted in red, so we're just really driving the point home. But no, that was helpful because when I walked in there, I was like, okay, I'm going to look at everything, and I love to read everything. It's almost too much.
Yeah.
So being able to be like, okay, here's the important bits is really helpful.
So it's about a 2.5 hour read if you read through everything.
Yeah, and I was definitely not there for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and we get that. And so actually why that highlighting is there is a internal staff thing. So we worked with Tim Bear, who's the directing artistic producer for Theater in the Park, which is part of JCPRD, just like the museum, and our graphic designer, who's in-house here, to produce this exhibit visually.
Okay.
And
it looks great.
Thank you. We provided them with this 40-page exhibit script, and they're like, well, what's important about this? And we're like, it all is important.
Right.
So we went through and highlighted various phrases and sentences and key terms and things in red to sort of drive the point of where we saw key narrative elements, where there might be images, where there could be graphics created to visually represent something, where documents or display cases might go. And so that was something to help our own staff sort of process what they were reading, but we found it was really helpful. And so we left it in. And you could go through this exhibit and read, there are 6 main sections, so big letters giving you section titles, and a box that's shaded in red. You could read that overview of the section and focus on those highlighted portions. The first sentence of each section is larger than the rest. It's sort of the topic sentence. You could go through and just read that stuff in about probably 20 minutes maybe and get a really good sense of what we're talking about in that exhibit. If you don't have 2.5 hours to go through and read everything.
Right. But listeners, you should take 2.5 hours.
Yeah, we hope you do. And like I said, it is heavy. It's a heavy topic. It's a lot of history to process. But knowing that history keys you into so many different things, about communities and how they develop and why they develop the way they do and things. So it's really,
definitely.
Yeah, it's important stuff.
And you actually had a couple of things that were kind of like a breakaway from the exhibit within the exhibit, the art.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So we did, as we were developing this exhibit, realize it is a very government policy, sort of top-down story. The policymakers were often white men. The people who were impacted by this were often communities of color. And there are far less sources about people who were impacted by these policies than there are sources that were created by the people making these policies, right? And so we felt it was really important to, where we could, insert voices of color. And we do that through pulling quotes from individuals, activists, and civil rights movement leaders and things. Newspapers, we had the Kansas City Call. We worked with them to get copies of articles from the 1920s showing that this was something that was being reported on by historic Black newspapers for almost a century. And we worked with, back to your point, the African American Artists Collective in Kansas City, Missouri, to create artwork in response to the topic of redlining. So their charge as artists was to create something roughly 12 inches by 12 inches, and they could do a series of up to 3 if they wanted to, in response to this huge topic of redlining and how it's impacted them, how it's impacted their communities, what they think about it, whatever their thought process or creative process might lead them to. And so there are 3 sort of nooks within the exhibit in that center section. And it's a chance to connect with a human in this story. You can walk into these little nooks. The sound sort of changes when you're in there. The walls are, right around you. You feel a little hemmed in, which is intentional. But you're also staring at something that was created by a human, expressing their viewpoints, their experiences. And I think it's a really good chance to process what this history meant for individuals, for people, in a way that historical narrative can't necessarily do. Yeah.
And a few of them actually, they really brought it to the present and incorporated Black Lives Matter into it.
Yeah. There's some very current stuff in there. As I said, the legacies in communities are far-reaching and continue to the present day in lots of different ways, as you see when you get to the end of the exhibit. So I think the artwork is all fascinating and beautiful and emotional, and it's a really excellent element. We're so glad they wanted to participate and create this exhibit within an exhibit. Yeah,
I agree.
Really, really cool.
I'm curious though, did you guys give them any notes about redlining, or you're just like, this is our topic and do what you want?
Just the topic. I think we provided probably sort of the general overview that's on the website, on our webpage. But that group of artists is very involved in the community. They're a lot of their topics are social justice topics and historical topics, so they're aware of this. Actually, for context, the African American Artists Collective in Kansas City has a show in the Nelson Atkins, I think through the end of this month, called Testimony.
Oh, okay.
Much larger pieces. Their artists are incredible. They're nationally known. Some of them are internationally known.
Nice.
Really cool stuff. So
I'll have to check them out.
Yeah.
So one of the things I noticed was, now I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it. I had it earlier. All right, so I'm thinking particularly of J.C. Nichols, who was a local man, and his policies really impacted the nation. But whenever he was creating his neighborhoods, he was like, you can't be black. I'm putting this very frankly. But he had other stuff in there about, like, you can't be Jewish, and you can't be this, you can't be that. And so, like, I noticed that the panels really focus on the fact that all these policies were targeting black families, but not so much that it also targeted these other groups.
Yeah, so in the Kansas City area, it tended to be a black-white issue when it comes to, so what you're talking about are racially restrictive covenants
Yes.
on deeds. So when you buy a house, there's a legal document saying you don't actually own the house, you own the piece of land the house is on, right? And that gets filed in the courthouse, and these get compiled. So you can go back in time hundreds of years in legal documents to trace who's owned your house. And sometimes they can be really interesting because
Sometimes, yeah.
divorces and death records and things are sometimes inserted in them. But within what Nichols was doing, trying to think of how to couch this. So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's take a historical journey here. In the early 20th century, early 1900s, when Nichols is starting to develop his automobile subdivisions, suburbs, right? There's this movement by the progressives, capital P progressives, to order society, to put regulations and policies in place, to create memberships for professional organizations, to all be sort of operating in the same way. So the American Medical Association is created in that time period. What else? There are other professional organizations, including the National Association of Real Estate Boards, NAREB, plays a prominent role in this early period. And so they're creating these legal tools on how to control a piece of property, basically. What they're seeing is the Great Migration. African Americans moving from the South to cities would sometimes lead to transitions in neighborhoods from all white neighborhoods to all black neighborhoods. And there was this assumption in place that had no basis in any kind of reports or any kind of scientific study that African Americans and other communities of color, beyond African Americans as well, Latinos, Asians, sometimes Jewish families, sometimes recent immigrants would be included in this. Those people would decrease the value of their home and the entire neighborhood around them. That was the assumption this is all based on, right?
Right.
And so Nichols and others like him, he is a leader absolutely in the Kansas City area. As you see in the exhibit, he's a leader in many ways in a national context. He's a leader of these organizations like NAREB, the Urban Land Institute, the National Association of Home Builders, literally writing a book called Community Builders, like how to be a community builder. They're creating these legal tools about controlling property. And so racially restrictive covenants had been around for a while. He included them in what he called declarations of restrictions. So a whole set of rules about how to use your property. You can't have chicken coops. Your front door has to be 30 feet from the road.
Because we all want it to look exactly the same.
Exactly the same,
pretty.
right? Exactly. Your house has to be at least 2,000 square feet. It can only be a single-family residence. And included in that were things that said this property can never be owned, used, leased, rented, or occupied by African Americans. If you're in Dallas, it might say Latinos. If you're in San Francisco, it might say Asians outside of New York City, or Asian Americans outside of New York City. It would say Jewish families. In some areas of Kansas City, Nichols did, on the Missouri side, did restrict against Jewish families in the teens, the 19-teens. By the time he's producing and creating neighborhoods in Johnson County, we don't see that. I've not seen a restriction from Nichols specifically. It's usually against African Americans. Others in the county, that may not be true. In fact, we know the Crow brothers who developed Leawood were restricting against Jewish families, anybody who was even 1/4 Jewish, as well as many other populations. In their deed restrictions, their racially restrictive covenants, they mention basically a whole list of the refugees after World War II, who weren't necessarily moving here, but they were populations that were moving into cities across the nation.
Yeah.
So, and again, Jewish families were restricted by the Crow brothers. So that's one part of controlling it. Another is creating homes associations, the forerunners of HOAs, a group that's formed in this neighborhood. You had to sign on when you bought a house. And that list of rules and the Declaration of Restrictions would become community bylaws that you pledged to uphold as a member of the homes association. And that way, if you broke them, if you built a chicken coop, right? I bring that up because Overland Park and other areas are Prairie Village
Very
are
rural.
still, well, they're dealing today with this topic of There's still a restriction against
really?
chicken coops, right? So these things are still in force in so many ways. I sort of lost my train of thought there. Homes associations. If you broke those rules, if you built a chicken coop, if you sold your house to a black family, the Homes Association could sue you to stop you from doing that. It's all about community control.
Yeah.
And not just control in the moment, but forever. Because the third tool that Nichols helped develop and then spread all three of these through the organizations he was in was automatically renewing restrictions. So that list of restrictions used to expire and you'd have to vote to renew it. He said, forget it. Let's just do it automatically. Every 25 years, it automatically renews. There is an opportunity at a very precise time ahead of that, 5 years ahead of that 25-year deadline. If you get 67% of the people who own property in the neighborhood to vote to change something, you could make a change. If you didn't, you missed your opportunity and you have to wait 25 more years to make that change.
So very specific, and
when they're
it'd be
community
very
planning,
difficult to
they're
organize.
planning for permanency. Was the language that they're using. People like J.C. Nichols, people like Charles Vaughter, people like the Crow brothers, William Strang. These are names in Johnson County in the Kansas City area, but make no mistake, there's 20,000 members of NAREB across the nation who are all working on these same premises and these same policies and rules, shaping suburban communities around all of the major and minor cities in the United States. So, yeah.
And so you talk about the different phases that redlining sort of takes over the years, how it evolves, and you talked about what is the word I'm looking for now? Urban renewal and what was the one before urban renewal that I'm trying to think of?
Well, there's white flight.
After that,
Racial turnover.
It's like when they're like cleaning the slums. There we go. Like that's a phrase that you have in the exhibit.
Yeah. So this policy comes out of the Great Depression, right? As a federal policy, the FHA. We've probably heard of FHA loans, Federal Housing Administration loans. The government is providing insurance on a mortgage, so a bank feels more free to give a mortgage to somebody maybe they wouldn't before, right? And it's at a better term. It's a 20-year mortgage at 10% or 20% down at the time of purchase, small monthly payments, and you're earning a line of equity when you're paying back that mortgage. Prior to the Great Depression, it was 50% down at the time of purchase, 50% off, 50% paid off over the next 3 to 5 years, and it was just a loan. There was no equity. There was no anything else along with it. So it was a very different type of mortgage at that time. So the FHA made home buying accessible to a lot of people who were sort of kept out of the market before. And so there are some huge ramifications for that, and great for some and not great for others. White flight, people leaving downtown urban areas because of those redlining maps, because of populations that are moving into cities, that assumption about devaluing property and things. People move out to the suburbs and they build homes, right? There's racial turnover in cities, so neighborhoods going from all white to all black when that white flight is happening. Yeah. You also see panic selling and blockbusting. Sometimes real estate agents took advantage of these things that were happening and made them happen quicker so they could make money on the deals, right? And so all of this leads to populations moving and resources moving out to the suburbs. The FHA preferred to give mortgages for new homes in new developments over older homes and existing developments. In their manuals, it explicitly says they won't work with African Americans, that you had to have racially restrictive covenants on your properties, that you needed to maintain. Richard Rothstein, who wrote a book called The Color of Law, called
Excellent book, listeners.
Yeah, and he spoke for the Kansas City, Kansas Public Library. There's a recording of it. I'm not sure if it's up yet. He called it federally mandated segregation through this policy.
Yep.
And so all these things are moving to the suburbs. And so what happens to the cities then? You start to get the word they use is blight, right? Storefronts closed. In the segregated sections of town, dilapidated buildings that had been happening for a long time. Overcrowding, poor conditions, people not keeping up the buildings that they're renting out to African Americans in these segregated areas. And so what happens is the Urban Land Institute that Nichols is a founder of, just to make a local connection, starts to study cities and says, okay, what do we do about this hole in the donut, these cities that are starting to economically disappear when all this vibrancy is happening in the suburbs? And their recommendation is urban renewal, capital U, capital R, a federal program of granting money to cities to go in and tear down the quote unquote slums, so slum clearance, going into a neighborhood that's overcrowded with poor living conditions and just demolishing those buildings and making it available for economic redevelopment. They recommend, well, I don't know if they recommend public housing. I don't think they probably did, but public housing projects are another phase or part of urban renewal, going in and building a tower or a campus of housing, often segregated by race when they're being built. And then also highway projects come in to speed it up for people to get back downtown again, building highway spokes out to the suburbs that are ringing cities, you know. And those highways, if you think about downtown Kansas City, the 35, 70, 670 loop that's around town, those were all neighborhoods where that highway is. You know, you go through 670 that's sunken down in. That was a whole block, you know, in width that was demolished and then the land removed in order to build that highway. And so you have displacement in Kansas City. Over a 30 or 40 year period, there are about 9,000 people who were removed from their homes, Black, white, and Latino as well. The west side went straight through, 35 went straight through the west side, which was a very heavy Latino neighborhood. And so all of these things, while it's not redlining per se,
it's a result of it.
It's a result of it. It's an exploitation of those disinvestment of urban neighborhoods, you know. When the government and private industry is providing mortgages in the suburbs and not downtown, that's disinvestment. And so what you see is sort of this spiral of disinvestment and removal of peoples to then redevelop that land to make it more economically viable, you know? Yeah. It's a complex history. And yeah, I'll leave it there. It's a complex history. Yeah.
Well, I knew of urban renewal, but I never knew about the creation of the bridges and how that played a part in the story. So that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to that regionalism, you know. Suburban areas were sort of exempt from urban renewal. That wasn't happening there. It was happening in those neighborhoods that were being just disinvested by the federal government and private industry. Yeah.
You have, I'll come back. I have another question that's kind of related to this, but I'm trying to go in order. So actually, my other question was going to be about gentrification, which I see as just another evolution of urban renewal, and you kind of hint at that in the exhibit, but you don't really go into a lot of detail on it.
Yeah, we're historians, and so when we get close to the present, it becomes difficult to talk about things sometimes, right?
Yeah, you don't have that sense of distance to give you some objectivity.
Yeah, but I think there are some real similarities between what urban renewal was doing and what gentrification can do in terms of making an area, reinvigorating the economy of an area, but then also removing a population. Because, you might buy a house for $20,000 and fix it up and sell it for $300,000, and that's great, but that affects the tax base or the taxes for that entire area. And that can chase out the people who live there. And what we do say in the exhibit is that's in many ways an exploitation of the conditions of 30 years, 50 years of redlining. That disinvestment has made those low prices possible for those neighborhoods. And then the changes that happen through gentrification, which is a really complex issue in itself and really hard to define. There are lots of different definitions of what that means out there. Those changes that take place are very similar in a lot of ways to that urban renewal type program.
Okay, so the other question that I was about to ask was, you have this really, I think this was actually my favorite part, the video at the end. You interviewed a couple community leaders about how they view this issue, and you asked them some very pointed questions like, what do you love about your neighborhood? What is your hope for the neighborhood?
How has redlining or similar policies have impacted your area? So what we wanted to be sure, especially as we got to the end of the exhibit, we didn't want folks to leave with a reinforced view of what NAREB was saying and what the federal government was doing, that disinvestment, that idea that redlined areas are bad areas. we wanted to be sure that people realize those areas are vibrant. There's communities living there that have been there for 100 years or more, that people love those neighborhoods, that they're just disinvested, that they don't have the funding necessarily from governments or private enterprise that other neighborhoods do. And so we talked to Dr. Carmeletta Williams, who's the director of the Black Archives.
Excellent institution. If you come to Kansas City, you have to go see it.
Yeah, it really is great. In fact, one of our programs through the Parks District's 50 Plus program is a tour of our exhibit and then a tour of the Black Archives exhibit that they have, which is really amazing. So Dr. Carmeletta Williams from the Black Archives of Mid-America talks about the 12th to 18th Street and Vine District, and also her own neighborhood of around 55th and Prospect, where she grew up. We talked to Marvin Robinson, who is a community historian and activist in Quindaro, which is part of Kansas City, Kansas, a very historic African-American neighborhood. It was the first free port on the Kansas River coming out of Missouri, an area that was sliced into by highway interchanges and almost lost to a landfill in the 1980s. And then we spoke with Gloria Ortiz Fisher, who's the director of Westside Housing Organization, an organization that was created in response to I-35 slicing through the West Side, the Latino West Side. And so all three of them give some really excellent perspectives. They also put a human face on these issues and reinforce that idea that, it's an unequal or there's inequity in the situations, not necessarily that those areas are, nobody lives there. People live there. They're vibrant. People love those communities. So that was the point. And that video, I have to say, I have not worked with a video like that before. So we created the questions, we did the interviewing, we worked with staff to produce the video, and we had 2 hours and 40 minutes of raw footage and cut it down to about 15 minutes.
Wow.
It was probably one of the most painful parts of the exhibit. I don't mean
because
that,
you had to cut out so much.
because there was so much to cut, and because cutting video is hard and cutting audio can be hard. People say what they say.
There is minimal editing that goes into this.
Yeah, and there's just so many amazing stories and quotes and things that had to be cut out in order to make that an accessible video. So maybe we'll do something with that in the future too. Okay. There's some really great stuff there. But I'm glad you enjoyed the video. I think it's an important part of the exhibit. And
how did you end up picking those three people?
Yeah, we wanted to highlight different areas of the Kansas City Metro. We'd hope to do have conversations with folks in other areas as well, but time just didn't play out in our favor with the pandemic and then also weather. But I think that they represent three really key areas of the story regionally, and from three different communities of color that were really have a long history with redlining and its legacies.
Yeah. Well, something that is still sticking with me is, what did you say her name was from West Side?
Gloria Fisher. Yeah,
Gloria Fisher.
Ortiz Fisher.
When she was talking about the bridge, she made a comment about the exhaust fumes from the cars now and how that's created air pollution, and I imagine it's impacted their health as well. So there's so much more that this even plays into.
Oh, yeah. In fact, the last section of the exhibit is called Lasting Legacies, and it's this sort of web of things that are related back to this disinvestment, to the policy of redlining, to segregation. When we were making this, we sort of joked half-heartedly that we felt like that meme of somebody standing in front of a wall with the red thread going to all these different things, that conspiracy wall, because there are so many connections between that history and modern legacies, especially around social determinants of health. The idea that where you live impacts your health as much as your genetic code. And so talking about for the West Side with I-35 built up over their homes, that all the exhaust, all the microscopic pieces of rubber and things that come off of and out of cars descend on that neighborhood then. And that's true, as I mentioned, the highway programs going through neighborhoods, that tended to focus on the areas that were segregated in town, those redlined areas. And so that's just one legacy. You can look at things like tree cover. In a redlined neighborhood, in an inner city, say, a tree dies, it doesn't necessarily get cut down. If it does, it doesn't necessarily get replaced. So you see neighborhoods in cities that have 50% less tree cover than areas in suburban neighborhoods. And so that leads then to increased heat in neighborhoods, which, besides just being uncomfortable, can have some lasting health effects. It also can affect your your educational performance in schools. If it's really hot and hard to concentrate, you're not going to do as well in school, which there are lots of other reasons that go into lower educational performances in previously redlined communities. That healthcare part of it is important because you see less hospitals and less clinics in previously redlined communities than you do in other areas of cities. Those tended to move out to the suburbs when populations moved. And so there's less access to healthcare. There's also transportation issues to be able to get you to a hospital or get you to a grocery store. There tends to be food deserts in downtown neighborhoods. And so public transportation can take you a long time to get to a hospital. You may not own a car. Getting to a grocery store might take you a long time. And if you work a job, it may not be possible to get to those places in working hours, right? So there's so many things that can play into but are lasting legacies of that system of disinvestment. And how your built community, the things you see around you look, and how that history plays into how your community looks. Yeah. I probably didn't explain that very eloquently, but there's a really key wall in the exhibit that I mentioned, that web wall, we call it, that shows some of those connections. And then we visualize this in a touchscreen in the exhibit that compares the 1939 redlining map with modern maps from the Kansas City Health Department. And there's often a correlation between what was a redlined area or previously redlined area on that 1939 map and those areas that were east of Troost in that segregated area of downtown today having, higher levels of lead in the blood of children, having increased obesity, having less sleep. Probably the most impactful one for me as I was going through these maps was a 16-year difference in life expectancy at birth between a neighborhood along Ward Parkway, say, in a Nichols development, and a neighborhood in the previously redlined area. 16 years difference. 69 years life expectancy for that previously redlined community, and 85 years along Ward Parkway, just to give an example. And again, you see these things around the nation, and some of these are really abstract, thinking about pollution or thinking about, heat maps and things in cities, but here you're talking about life. You're talking about somebody's life. So that one really got us as a staff to think about that and what that means.
Yeah, no kidding. The last thing in the exhibit is a wall where people can leave a sticky note with their reaction to the museum or to the exhibit. How's that going?
Yeah, so this is an important part of almost every exhibit that we do. We have some sort of feedback wall. It often takes the form of a sticky note because it's so simple, to write on and stick it there. It's easy to do. And so we have a few questions there for folks to think about. They can reflect on their experiences in the exhibit, what they learned. And it's great to see responses. It's also great to see conversations happening between the Post-it notes. You see people drawing lines and commenting on other people's comments and agreement or disagreement, and just people engaging in it. You can see the number of Post-it notes there. We eventually, of course, will have to go through and sort of curate out the number just to increase the amount of space. But we keep all those. Those get filed with our exhibit files when the exhibit comes down as well. And so I love that engagement. I love seeing that engagement. And another way to engage with this exhibit is through a dedicated hashtag Redlined KC, capital R and capital KC. We created that hashtag for this exhibit, for the programming we're doing, programming across the metro. So all those things are tied back to that hashtag, and you can get in the conversation there too, and see what people are saying and comment back on things. So yeah, that community engagement piece is really important, especially as people are sort of thinking through these issues and what they want the future to look like, where they see themselves in this history. Yeah.
Was that redlined with capital K and C or just capital K?
K and C. Yep. Capital R for redlined and capital KC.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Last couple questions here.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're getting tired.
And yeah, this is sort of what I do now. After this exhibit open, we do a lot of group tours. You can schedule group tours with us and things.
Look, Andrew, you keep anticipating my questions. You gotta stop doing that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead and ask your question.
you have a lot of public programming, so can you talk about that?
Yeah, so there's several other ways to engage with this material besides just going through this exhibit. We offer a slate of programming almost one a month, not quite, for this year in 2022 at the Johnson County Museum. And you can find that on the website jocomuseum.org. No, you can find that on the website jcprd.com/redlined.
Can you say that again slower?
Yeah. On our website, jcprd.com/redline. It stands for Johnson County Park and Recreation District. jcprd.com/redline. You'll find an overview of the exhibit and then also all the programming we're offering here. And we realized there's so much history here, and that history might look different in different communities. And so we thought it would be helpful to have a larger community help tell this story. And so we reached out to cultural institutions, museums, libraries, universities, other organizations to see if they would offer a program at their locations of their own choosing in 2022. And we would help promote that and put it all together in that webpage, right? And so we have about 24 institutions, and it was KC based, and now it actually stretches from Wichita to St. Louis.
Wow.
So a
That's
huge
incredible.
region-wide conversation around redlining, its foundations, and its legacies in 2022. We're really proud of that. And there are just a lot of different types of programming, events, exhibits, panel discussions, documentary showings, tours, ways to get involved there. And then we do also, as I mentioned, offer quarterly free days. So March 17th, June 11th, there'll be some later in the year as well in September and I think November. Those are listed on our website, which is jocomuseum.org. And we do also have guided tours. You can call and schedule something. We don't do walk-ins necessarily for those guided tours, but if you call and set something up, we can offer that to folks for a admission cost and a fee for that too. So
Okay.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of those right now, so I'm primed to talk about redlining at a drop of a hat.
Well, I'm sure it's not just you. Other members of the staff.
Yeah,
are
there's
also
other members
helping.
of staff, but yeah.
Okay, we covered a lot. That's all that I had
Yeah.
identified that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else that's standing out to you?
I think I would just say that this is a topic that is may not seem relevant to the lives of a lot of people, but it's so intertwined in our built environment, in the communities we live in the opportunities that we have, that I think it's important to understand it, and then to think about, what a future might look like when you start to read through this history. And, there are ways to get involved. You can come to the exhibit, go to the programming. One thing we realized as we went through this research process is that the communities who were impacted by these policies were often almost always not at the table. They weren't able to voice their concerns or their points of view on things. And so listening is really important in communities and across regions, across cities, listening to others' points of views. And, if you want to volunteer or get involved in organizations, all those things are out there for you to find, down to the level of where you shop and where you eat can make a difference too. So just different ways to get involved and to care about the larger community that you inhabit and what you want that to look like in the future.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, listeners. What a kick-ass exhibit that is. Awesome museum. Andrew is always wonderful to talk with. He just knows so much and he explains everything so well and in a nice, even, unhurried manner, whereas I would be like, oh yeah, this. Oh wait, I forgot something, and go back and it'd be all confused. Quick note, so at the beginning when I introduced him, I mentioned another episode we had done together. Currently, that is a Patreon-only episode, Patreon-exclusive episode. This episode is a Patreon episode, but because the topic is so important and we touch on so many things, the exhibit touches on so many things. I mean, it also talks about housing segregation, more than just redlining, like the segregation, right? Talks about civil rights, talks about desegregation of schools. There's stuff in there about econ. When we were discussing the bridges and how it destroyed the neighborhoods at the end, I mean, that's public health. We mentioned the lack of trees, which contributes to higher levels of heat in the summertime. That's climate change. That's the environment. So because of all of that and more, I think that the topic is really important. This specific episode is really important. So I am actually going to leave this up for all of you to listen to until the end of this year, 2022. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Please listen to this episode. Please go see the exhibit if you live in the area or if you're going to visit. And that's another reason why I'm going to leave this up for so long, is because I know that I have a lot of international listeners and I have a lot of listeners who live outside of Kansas City, and so you won't get to go see the exhibit. So speaking of Patreon, I hope that you will consider becoming a patron supporter of the show. You can do so a couple different ways. You can subscribe to Patreon, that's patreon.com/homegrownkc, or redcircle.com, that's redcircle.com/homegrownkc. You can subscribe there, follow the show. You'll be charged on the first of every month, and you can give as little or as much as you want. If you become a patron subscriber, you get 3 cool things. 1, you get a shout out on each episode and media posts. So thank you, Bjorn and Joan. You get access to exclusive episodes like this one, like the previous one that I did with Andrew. And you get an item from the merchandise store valued at $5 or less. If you can't become a monthly subscriber, which is totally cool, you can give a one-time donation at redcircle.com/homegrownkc or ko-fi.com, that's ko-fi.com/homegrownkc. And those who donate will still receive a shout out on the show, because I appreciate y'all. And of every donation to Homegrown KC on Ko-fi, 1% automatically goes to help fight climate change. And again, if you're like, no, I don't have, $5 to throw you. It's cool, I get it. You can still support me by sharing the show with all your friends and family, with your neighbors, your coworkers. Like and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, Tumblr, my YouTube channel. Rate and review me on Apple Podcasts and on Facebook. Visit the website, homegrownkc.wordpress.com, for more information. You can also sign up for my newsletter at that website. It'll be about once a month. You'll get here's what's going on, here's the episodes that are available, here's what's coming up. It's not going to be an everyday thing. Don't worry about that. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can email me at homegrownkcpodcast@gmail.com or DM me on any of the social media networks. To check out what's available in the merchandise store, go to www.zazzle, that's zazzle.com/store/homegrown_KC_store. One more big announcement. I will be at a history festival at the end of April. I'm going to have a booth. It's at the First City History Festival in my hometown of Leavenworth, Kansas. So if you live in the area, please come check out the festival. Stop by the booth, say hi. It's going to have food trucks, live music, some fun contests. There's going to be like a beard growing contest. And all the museums in the area are going to be sponsored. Thank you goes out to my sister-in-law, Sarah McCombs, for the creation of my logo, to the Dear Misses for the use of their song Kansas City as the intro and outro music of the show, and to local libraries, which enabled me to gather my research. A special thank you to you, my listeners, and a special thank you to Andrew. Cheers!
ask you this tonight, 'cause I can't seem to shake this feeling, and I can't seem to get you off my mind.